August 27, 2017. Around 1:30 a.m., police in Detroit, Michigan respond to the scene of a terrifying car accident.
A 911 call was placed because a vehicle had crashed into a church. One of the walls in the parking lot, a vehicle had driven through the wall of the parking lot, and they believe they saw a person inside the vehicle.
Responders get to the scene, and they notice a 20-something-year-old man slumped over, barely breathing.
At those hours, it's typically pretty quiet. The person was driving eastbound on Mack Avenue. It looks like they lost control around this location. You can see the tires in the grass. He went through a 3-foot high brick wall, and then his vehicle came to a rest in a parking lot.
Upon closer inspection, officers spot evidence of a reason for the crash.
They notice bullet holes on the driver's side of the vehicle, as well as blood dripping from the man's body.
EMS now arrives and discovers that the person is shot. There's a chest wound. Now it's turning into a different investigation.
First responders are able to identify him as 29-year-old Jonte Brooks. They jump into action, and they rush him to the hospital because they try to save this man's life.
Jonte Maurice Lewis Brooks was born in 1988. His mother, Teresa Brooks, had him when she was little more than a child herself.
Jonte is my firstborn. I was really happy when he first got home, and my mom took care of him because I was just 17. So she took care of us together, you know.
Jonte grew up in a loving, close-knit family. He had 3 brothers, 1 sister. Unfortunately, Jonte's father was not in the picture, so he took it upon himself at a very early age to be the man of the family.
In high school, Jonte's charm made him popular with the girls in his class. But he only had eyes for one young woman in particular, named Dewayna.
He couldn't stay away from her, and she couldn't stay away from him. So they were like together. They had a great relationship. They went to the prom together. It's beautiful.
They were head over heels in love with each other, and they were overjoyed when they had their first child. Not having a father in his life, Jonte took the role of being a father very seriously, so he was a very active dad.
Although they never married, the couple went on to have 4 more children together, and Jonte worked hard to support them.
Jonte eventually figured out that he thrived working with his hands and landed a career in landscaping. He took a lot of pride in his work and creating beautiful landscapes for all of his clients.
Settling down at such a young age sometimes put a strain on the relationship. But the couple always seemed to work things out.
They broke up for a second, and then they got right back together. And I knew that it was just love. They couldn't stay away from each other.
However, during one of their breaks, Jonte fathered a child with another woman. Eventually, there was no more getting back together.
Even though he and the mom eventually went their separate ways, he still prioritized co-parenting and being there for all of his children.
He was a great dad. He went, picked them up, took them wherever he went, brought them over to the house. Even if he wasn't going to be there, he still had the kids there, always.
Even if he wasn't with the mothers any longer, he was right there, being a great father figure to all of them.
Really proud of him, because there's a lot of men out here that have kids and just don't even recognize them. He didn't have a lot, but for sure he had those kids with him by his side, whatever he was doing.
In the fall of 2016, Jonte decided to take another chance on love with 26-year-old Minetta Yeager.
Mignetta actually pursued Jonte, and he found this really appealing because she would take the initiative. And so she would take him out on dates, pick him up for dates, pay for things, and this was unfamiliar to someone who had to provide for everyone in his life. They had a really happy relationship, always spending time together, going on dates, and just really excited about the future.
He actually thinks that she may potentially be the one, but as in oftentimes in cases like this, you know, there's a hiccup along the way, and the relationship begins to fade, and it falls apart.
By 2017, Jonte had simplified his life, focusing on spending time with his children. But now, he's clinging to life. Detroit police have determined Jonte lost consciousness and crashed into a church after someone shot him. The question is who?
There's no guns in the car, there's no passenger in the vehicle, so obviously somebody from outside the vehicle fired into the car. We try to figure out, one is motive. Was this person an intentional target? Was it an accident?
Witnesses tell police a truck was pursuing Jonte shortly before he crashed.
Several witnesses noticed the white minivan seemed to be trying to get away from the red pickup truck. However, once the white minivan crashed into the church, the red pickup truck fled the scene. They were not able to see the license plate. However, they did notice there were two people in the vehicle, a man and a woman.
Unfortunately, none of them saw the shooting.
Officers survey the scene and notice there are no shell casings at the church. They realize the shooting must have occurred somewhere else.
We would call that a two-part scene. The secondary crime scene would have been where he was found. The original crime scene would be where he was shot.
One theory was that this was possibly a road rage incident, because that's what normally happens if you see one vehicle chasing another down the road.
In that specific area, we haven't responded to too many homicides. There is a little bit of prostitution over there. There's some breaking and entering of automobiles and stolen cars and things of that nature. Now, the investigative wheels are spinning to where this could have happened at.
As officers are surveying the scene, they notice down the street at the gas station, there are multiple cars and blue flashing lights. And they wonder, is this part of the current scene?
In the early morning hours of August 17, 2017, Detroit police begin their investigation into the shooting of 29-year-old Jonte Brooks. Before they've even finished interviewing witnesses, they receive some tragic news.
Unfortunately, the paramedics were not able to save his life, and he does die at the hospital. He was killed from a single bullet that went through his right shoulder and went through his lungs.
So now you have a murder investigation. And now, where was he murdered?
Flashing lights from patrol cars at a gas station nearby tip off officers to the possible location.
Coincidentally, there's a crime scene just down the street. Second call that had come in for shots fired at the gas station. Officers at the scene were quickly able to determine that the two incidents were connected.
When investigators arrive, they find evidence of a relentless attack. 17 spent shell casings scattered on the ground.
Officers notice all 17 shell casings are the same, so they seemingly come from the same weapon, meaning there's probably just one shooter. After Jonte was shot, he tried to get away. Unfortunately, he succumbed to his injuries, swerved and drove right into the church and crashed.
You have a two-part scene, so we would have to break those two up and then have evidence techs or our crime scene services section document each location.
17 shell casings tell a story within itself, right? It says someone wanted someone dead.
Officers talked to the gas station owner, and he says he then noticed a red pickup truck pull up and a white minivan pulled up right next to it. He heard some arguing and heard some gunshots, about 6 or 7 of them.
The owner tells police that when he ran to the window, he caught a glimpse of the shooter.
The gas station owner noticed it was a young black woman shooting at the white minivan. At this point, the white minivan pulled out and sped off. The woman followed, shooting on foot at the white minivan, then jumped back into the red pickup truck and tried to follow him.
Unfortunately, he's unable to provide a description of the driver or the license plate.
People don't look out the window and expect a homicide to happen and say, I'm documenting it step by step by step. I'm looking at my watch. Okay, it's now. They're not doing that. You know, you're busy doing this. All of a sudden you hear something, you look, and you only capture this much.
Luckily, the gas station has security cameras covering the entire area.
What's better than the witness account is the video at the store, which captures the event in its entirety from start to finish.
Officers review the surveillance footage, and they notice an older black man driving the vehicle and a young black woman in the passenger seat. She's on her phone, and she seems very animated as she's talking. At this point, a white minivan pulls up beside them with the window rolled down. They start to argue, and the young lady jumps out of the vehicle and starts shooting at the white minivan.
Based on the video footage, there wasn't any delay, there was no physical contact, there wasn't any of that.
The video provides investigators with enough information to identify the driver.
Not only does the surveillance footage show the shooting happening, it also reveals the license plate of the vehicle. They're able to tell the vehicle belongs to 44-year-old LeBaron Borum. The officers check his DMV photo, and they notice there is a resemblance to the person in the surveillance video. The officers also realize he lives in the neighborhood of the gas station.
From that, we did surveillance and were able to locate the vehicle parked in the driveway. And from there, we were able to locate and eventually interview the owner of that red pickup.
Ultimately, police arrive at LeBaron's door, and they have questions for him.
At this point, he's the one that ultimately gets to decide what role he wants to play in this investigation. In these investigations, typically when you have multiple defendants, whether it's a bank robbery with 4 or 5 defendants or a homicide with 3 or 4 defendants, typically the first person that comes to the table to talk to the prosecutors will get the best outcome.
And he spills it all. It ends up being a very wild night and a wild scene.
Detroit police are questioning 44-year-old LeBaron Borum, one of 2 suspects identified at the scene of Jonte Brooks' murder. According to LeBaron, he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He says he was strictly trying to be a good Samaritan, and he just got caught up in a very bad situation.
LeBaron says it began with an argument between 2 strangers on his front lawn.
LeBaron tells the officers his son ran into the house and told him, "Dad, there's a van that ran up onto our yard." At this point, LeBaron went outside to see what was going on.
What he says is that he notices there's a female and a male, they're arguing, there's some type of altercation going on. Ultimately, he says the male gets into the vehicle, and it appears that he's about to run the female over. She ultimately gets out of the way, and he drives on in this white van.
LeBaron tells the officers he does recognize the lady from the neighborhood. It is 27-year-old Minetta Yeager.
He knew the man arguing with Minetta as well. It was her ex-boyfriend, Jonte Brooks.
What he stated was that he was aware that Miss Yeager and Mr. Brooks were in a tumultuous type of relationship.
By the time LeBaron came to her aid, Jonte had already driven away.
He went to help Miss Yeager, thinking that this was a woman in distress. And she ultimately says, hey, you know, yes, can you go after this white van? That's my mother's van. I gotta get it back. I'm concerned. My boyfriend just attacked me and he took the van. He had no clue that she had a gun on her. So he ultimately lets Miss Yeager into his vehicle and they drive off looking for this white minivan.
While they were chasing Jonte, Mignetta called police to report the van stolen. Then she called Jonte.
Miss Yeager said her plan was to try to keep Jonte on the phone as long as possible so the police can get to him and he could be arrested.
There's some heated words being said back and forth. Ultimately, he also hears that they agreed to meet up on the east side of Detroit at a gas station in the area of Van Dyke and Warren Avenue. And this would have been around 1 o'clock in the morning on August 27th. When they get to the gas station, there's no Jonte. And so, you know, she instantly calls Jonte on her phone. She argues with him, why didn't you show up? Well, apparently he did show up because he says that he noticed that she was in a vehicle with another man. He's not too happy about that, according to her, and he has choice words. She indicates to LeBaron that he ultimately makes a threat towards her, saying he's gonna kill them.
At this point, LeBaron was reconsidering his decision to get involved. But he ultimately agreed to drive to another gas station.
LeBaron tells the officers Jonte pulled up about a minute later. But then they started arguing because he was highly upset.
He says something to apparently push her buttons. She immediately gets out the vehicle and pulls out a weapon. And she starts to fire into the vehicle that Jonte is in.
Mr. Brooks, without hesitation, just hit the gas and took off. In the course of the shots being fired at the vehicle, Mr. Brooks was shot.
But the harrowing encounter wasn't over yet.
At this point, LeBaron is terrified. He didn't know what just happened. He wanted to just get out of there. However, Ms. Yeager jumped back into the vehicle and told him to just drive.
As Jonte is attempting to get away, he's obviously shot and he's obviously hurt because he then pulls into the lot of a church which is nearby on Mack Avenue and at that point collapses. LeBaron seeing this and Miss Yeager seeing this as they're chasing him, they then decide to pull off and keep going. What LeBaron indicates to the police is that he noticed some lights behind him and, you know, he freaks out.
He saw the police coming and he did not want to be a part of that at all.
He decides to turn down a side street. He ultimately makes his way back home. And strangely enough, he says that Miss Yeager just gets out the vehicle and walks back home. Doesn't say a single word. And from that point, he says he doesn't hear from her ever again. In fact, you know, he doesn't hear anything else until police arrive at his door.
Investigators believe LeBaron is telling the truth. Unfortunately, his actions still make him an accessory to murder.
I don't know if Miss Yeager was intentionally trying to kill Mr. Brooks, but her reckless display of firing a weapon and her disregard for life or anything, the outcome was ultimately homicide. So here we are.
He is ultimately charged as an accessory after the fact. And police charged him because he helped her flee the scene. And then he doesn't immediately go to police.
Hours after the murder of Detroit native Jonte Brooks, investigators are searching for the woman accused of shooting him. Jonte's ex-girlfriend, Mignetta Yeager. They also reach out to Jonte's loved ones to notify them of his death.
That Sunday morning when I woke up, I'm in Vegas. I woke up, I looked at my phone. My phone is flooded with mixed texts and messages. So I listened to one of my voicemails. It was my youngest son. And he said, "Ma," he was crying. He said, "Ma, I can't believe this. This girl killed your son." I called home. I said, "What is going on?" My youngest son said, "Ma, I just got back from the hospital. I had to view him. He said she killed your son. I just lost it. I lost it."
After recovering from the initial shock, Jonte's family tells police they feared something like this might eventually happen.
What we had learned through the investigation was it was a tumultuous relationship.
So while things started out great in the beginning for Jonte, the transition happened when things got a little more hostile in the relationship. So Miss Yeager started calling him a lot, stalking him, accusing him of being with other women, popping up unannounced at his family's house.
I always heard her in my home, but I never cared to meet her or anything because she was loud, you know. Every time she came to my house, she was always loud. And I just told him that, you know, she can't come over no more because she's very disrespectful. And he said, okay.
When partners start showing that behavior of calling him a lot, accusing him of being with other women, at first we take that as a sign of, you know, they like me, they're crazy about me. That behavior tends to get ignored a lot until it's very problematic, right? But at that point, it's a pattern and you find yourself stuck in a relationship, right? That's unhealthy.
I know there was a lot of 911 calls back and forth for the domestic situations between her and him. So there was definitely, from a long-term perspective, there was a build-up.
Jonte's loved ones became even more concerned when they discovered Minyetta's family had a history of violence.
Unfortunately, Minyetta was no stranger to this type of violence. Her sister years prior had murdered her ex-boyfriend and his current girlfriend.
I told my son, I said, Jonte, Minyetta is dangerous. Stay away. He was young. He said, okay, I know, Mom, I know. But he didn't.
In August 2017, 2 weeks before Jonte's murder, the family says he and Minyetta got into a heated argument.
Miss Yeager was very erratic and emotional at this time. Jonte's mother showed the police officers her ring camera. And it shows Mrs. Yeager standing outside her house, banging on the door, yelling for Jonte to come out. He refuses to come out. However, finally, he does come to the door.
They got into it. She bust out all my windows in my front of my house. And then she also bust out the window in my car.
But despite Minyetta's alleged violent outburst, Jonte refused to get police involved.
In a case where you have the male that's the victim, what we oftentimes see is that they don't go to authorities for numerous reasons. One is they're not believed. Those type of cases, unfortunately, aren't taken seriously. And also, it's that male stigma, right? You want to be tough, and to go to police or to go to friends or loved ones and say, hey, I'm being abused by this female, well, takes a little way away from your masculinity. So men feel a little ashamed. You rather walk away. And that's what Jonte was doing here.
Crazy.
Instead, he finally decided to break up with her.
August 27th, that's the day he got killed. But that Friday before, I talked to him, and he was like, Mom, I see what everybody is saying. I gotta get away from this girl. Say, Jonte, I agree. He said, I got to get away.
When you're in a relationship that is hostile and volatile and unpredictable and unsafe, you do reach a breaking point, and you don't want to hear from that person anymore. You cut them off completely, and a lot of times that is not well received.
The night before he died, Jonte agreed to meet up with Mignetta one last time.
What we know is that on August 26th, Jonte is contacted by Miss Yeager, and she's insistent. She wants to meet with him. She wants to talk. He's trying to tell her, no, it's over. I'm moving on. There's nothing else, I need to talk about. And she wants to meet him at his aunt's house, which is not far from where she lives.
Mignetta was always bribing him with money and gifts. Even if he says no, she will still come around. If he don't react the way that she want him to react, she will sit in the driveway and just blow on the horn. Just lay on the horn. So this particular night, she did this. Jonte didn't want no problems, because this was my sister's house. And she was beating on the door at first. My sister came to the door and told her that Jonte is asleep. So she go back to the car and just lays on the horn at my sister's home. Jonte came outside and, he went with her.
Just a few hours later, Jonte was dead. And now investigators can't find Mignetta anywhere.
They've been cabin sitting the neighborhood. They put a bolo out. At this point, they even go to the news media because they cannot find her anywhere.
This is on 11 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news, and ultimately someone does see and does give information. It's her, it's Miss Yeager herself.
Less than 24 hours after fatally shooting her ex-boyfriend, Jonte Brooks, Mignetta Yeager turns herself in to Detroit police.
She was transported to our holding facility, which is the Detroit Detention Center, and I went and interviewed her there. But I believe that she had an opportunity to speak with a lawyer before she turned herself in, so our interview was very short.
The story Mignetta tells police is quite different from the one they've heard so far. Mignetta claims she's the one who ended the relationship with Jonte, not the other way around.
She says she was abused by Jonte for months now. And at this point, she went to the mother's house because she finally had the courage to break up with him. She says that once she told him that she wanted to break up, he went crazy.
According to Mignetta, Jonte is the abuser in the relationship. And on this night, she says that he pulled her out of the van, beat her up, even beat her with a pistol at one point.
She finally was able to get away and run away from him. But no, he took the van and tried to run her over. At this point, LeBaron was there, and she saw him, and he offered to help.
Mignetta says she asked LeBaron to drive her to the gas station, intending to get her van back from Jonte. As she got out of LeBaron's truck, he handed her a gun to protect herself.
She says, in fact, that it was LeBaron who had the weapon and that she was simply there to just talk to Jonte. But she takes the weapon. She's in fear. She's in natural fear. She doesn't know what Jonte's gonna do. She says ultimately, out of self-defense, she shoots at Jonte. And she probably shot once or twice, 2 or 3 times at most. But then she tells police that her memory is foggy about the exact details.
Investigators are skeptical of her claims.
But it didn't make much sense because, she says that she was abused and he was the abuser, but yet she's pursuing him. There's evidence that shows that she's appeared at his mother's house on a couple of occasions and, threw a brick through the mother's windshield tried to attack him when he opened the door to have a conversation. She says she shot 2 or 3 times at most, but we know from the physical evidence that there were 17 shell casings there at the gas station.
The police had a tough job in this situation because on one hand we have Marietta, who is reporting abuse, and then on the other hand they also have contradicting reports where she was the abuser.
In a situation of domestic violence, you'll see signs of abuse. You'll see black eyes, you'll see broken noses, you'll see fat lips and cuts and scars and things of that nature. But in this situation, I don't remember any type of injuries to her. Now, there was a day or two that had passed, so if something healed, I'm sure there's probably some doctors that could argue one way. There's some doctors that could probably argue the other. However, in this situation, I didn't see anything obvious.
I think that people in general expect a bad woman to act and look a certain way, that this person is going to be meek and timid and scared and crying. And in my experience, you don't know how you're going to act. People do act different ways, so we have to investigate.
Minietta's statement also raises another question.
Miss Yeager said LeBaron gave her a gun, but LeBaron said Miss Yeager just brandished the gun. So where did the gun come from?
It's a very important detail because if LeBaron, in fact, did hand her this weapon, well, maybe this is not a first-degree murder case. Maybe this is a second-degree murder case or manslaughter.
When investigators re-interview LeBaron Borum, he says Minietta is lying.
LeBaron says he doesn't own a gun, does not have one registered to him or anything. The police even search his home and do not find one.
But Minietta doesn't appear to have the gun either.
In murder cases, oftentimes the defendant, especially when they've had time to flee the scene and head home, they'll discard the weapon, they'll throw it somewhere, they'll hide it someplace, they might pass it on to someone else. Police did search for the weapon but couldn't find it, which is not unusual. But they have enough evidence.
There's a misconception that you need a firearm to prove a homicide occurred or to charge somebody with homicide. That's not true.
The video evidence is pretty damning in and of itself.
On August 30th, 2017, Minietta Yeager is charged with first-degree murder. At her arraignment, she shows little remorse.
It was like around her birthday, and she told the judge, well, can we get this on because my birthday is coming up, so I want to get out of here. And the judge say, Miss Minietta, this is a homicide right here. You're not getting out that fast.
On September 6th, 2017, family and friends of Jonte Brooks gathered to pay their last respects.
He had a big funeral. We kept the casket open. I didn't want them to close it on him, And